Hi, I'm Chuck Manski, Sam's first son. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person for this important annual event. It would have been nice to visit Temple Lemeth again. I've been away for many years, but my roots go deep. I attended school at the temple, and I still recall my bar mitzvah in 1961. After that, I led the teenage youth service each Shabbat until I was 16 years old. Growing up, I had little awareness of exactly how my father came to the United States. I knew that he was a refugee, but I did not know the details. I learned the full story 25 years ago, and it was then that I first came to appreciate the significance of the name Sugihara. At that time, when my father was 65, I asked him to write up his experiences in book form. The result was his book, With God's Help, which some of you know. In the book, my father explained how the diplomat Sugihara provided the key transit visa that enabled him and his family to leave the Soviet Union and come to the United States via Japan. And he described his experiences in Japan in early 1941, arriving at Suruga and living in Kobe for several months. I'm not going to talk about my father's experiences, as many of you know about them. Instead, I want to share with you some impressions that I have formed about Japanese appreciation of Sugihara's efforts. As an academic, I regularly come into professional contact with Japanese faculty and PhD students. When we have a chance to talk informally, I often mention that my father was helped by Sugihara to escape from Europe during the war. When I first mentioned this to Japanese friends and colleagues, perhaps 20 years ago, very few of them knew the name Sugihara or knew what he did for Jewish refugees. However, Japanese recognition of this important piece of history has clearly grown over time. In recent years, all I have to do is say the name Sugihara, and I find that the Japanese people I meet immediately recognize it. When I say that my father was one of the people whom Sugihara saved, I find that an immediate bond forms between us. To give just one example, in late April of this year, I was in Washington for a meeting of the National Academy of Sciences, and I happened to be seated at dinner next to Dr. Akira Tonomura, a respected physicist at the Hitachi Corporation in Japan. We knew nothing about each other, and we have no common professional interests. However, we immediately found something in common as soon as I mentioned Sugihara and my father's stay in Japan. 2 weeks later, I was surprised to receive from Tonomura a handwritten note in the mail. He wrote that he felt honored to have met me because my father is famous in Japan. Now, I don't think of my father as famous, but I suppose that after we met, Tonomura must have done an internet search and found my father's name mentioned in connection with Sugihara. Last summer, in August 2009, I made my first trip to Japan. I went there for 2 conferences, first one in Kyoto and then another one in Tokyo. 2 of the participants at these conferences were Tsunao Okamura and Emiko Usui, a married couple who both were former PhD students at Northwestern, where I teach. In fact, I had been one of the thesis advisors of Tsunao, who now is a professor of economics at Yokohama University, and I had taught Emiko, who similarly is a professor at Nagoya University. We had a day free after the Kyoto conference ended, so Tsunao and Emiko offered to take me to some historical sites in Kyoto. More importantly, they came up with the great idea of us all traveling by train to Suruga to see where my father had arrived in Japan after crossing the Sea of Japan from Vladivostok. I told Tsunao and Emiko that Suruga had built a new Port of Humanity museum to commemorate its role in hosting refugees. And I told them that the mayor of Suruga had even visited Boston to see the Sugihara monument at Temple Lemeth. So we decided that we should definitely visit the museum. They called the museum to see if it would be open and mentioned that they were bringing Charles Manski, the son of one of the Sugihara refugees. I then learned that my father really is famous in Japan, or at least he is in Suruga. As soon as the museum staff heard the name Manski, they told Tsunao and Emiko that they would like me to be interviewed by a local newspaper and TV station. Moreover, they said that the mayor would come to the museum to meet me. This was not what I was expecting. I simply wanted to make a quiet visit to Suruga to see where my father had entered Japan. We arrived in Suruga after a pleasant train ride that passed through bright green rice paddies and then across a range of coastal hills. We were met at the train station by the director of the museum. He showed us the port area and a building where the refugees had been processed for arrival. We then went to the museum for a tour. The entrance has a very impressive outdoor mural showing an image of Sugihara against a map of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. The route that the refugees took to Japan, beginning in Lithuania and across Russia to Japan, is traced on the map. At the museum, I was indeed interviewed by reporters and film crews, and the mayor arrived for a handshaking ceremony, accompanied by his aides and more media. He is quite a character, as some of you know. I later learned from Tsunao and Amiko that stories did appear in the local media. My role in all of this was to serve as living proof of the results of Sugihara's efforts. I expressed my appreciation to the people of Tsuruga, and I came to understand why they had built the museum. They were very proud to have done their part 60 years ago to help save a group of people from certain death. Tsuruga had similarly accepted refugees from Russia around 1920, after the revolution that brought the communists into power. Thus, I learned that the people of Tsuruga had a long history of being hospitable to foreigners and of helping refugees. They did not need to do this. They had no common history or family connections with Jews like my father. Nevertheless, they did what they could to help, for the sake of humanity. And this, of course, is what Sugihara did, at great cost to himself. He was a true hero. Thanks for listening. I wish all of you well.